You
So
sound,
where does
you
that
sound
leave
pissed.
you?
You sound
I
pissed
am
off.
pissed for the American people. This is absolute bullshit. And it's absurd that we are in a body with 435 members. Everybody has a responsibility to serve their district, to serve their constituents.
What do you say though to the speaker who's not going to give you a vote on this ACA extension?
That's a failure of leadership. I mean, we have, members on both sides who believe this is an urgent issue, and it is for all of our members in terms of what their constituents are going to have to deal with in the start of the new year. So what's wrong with having
Donald Trump is having an absolutely catastrophic day, and multiple crises are hitting his administration all at once. We're talking about serious problems piling up simultaneously. MAGA Republicans are rebelling against him and publicly expressing their frustration. Trump has been exposed manipulating inflation data to present a more favorable picture. The New York Times just released a detailed expose about Trump's friendship with Jeffrey Epstein in the 1990s. And Trump got caught running what appears to be a shell game with military pay, taking money from troops' housing allowances and repackaging it as a bonus. This is all happening today. All of this is unfolding right now, and I'm going to walk you through every single development, because this is the kind of day that reveals serious questions about leadership and accountability. But real quick, before we get into this, let's be honest. You can't really trust mainstream media anymore. That's why we built National Brief Network to bring you real stories, real context, and no corporate spin. If you want to stay ahead of the headlines, please subscribe to our channel, because you might think you are, but aren't. Your subscription actually matters here. All right, let's start with one of the most significant stories of the day. The New York Times just published a detailed expose on Donald Trump's relationship with Jeffrey Epstein during the 1990s and early 2000s. The article is titled, "Don's Best Friend: How Epstein and Trump Bonded Over the Pursuit of Women." The article describes how Trump and Epstein had a relationship that was close enough that people who knew them believed they were each other's closest friends during that period. According to the reporting, their friendship was built around a shared lifestyle and social activities during the 1990s. The article includes interviews and documents that paint a picture of two men who spent considerable time together and had a bond that others noticed. The timing of this article is particularly noteworthy because the Epstein files are scheduled to be released tomorrow. There are questions about whether the administration will try to influence what information becomes public and what might remain classified or redacted. And it's worth noting that MAGA Mike Johnson just shut down the House of Representatives and sent everyone home right as these Epstein files are about to be released. Congress is going on vacation the day before this information is supposed to become public. Whether that's coincidental or strategic, it's certainly raised questions among observers about the timing. Now let's talk about the second major crisis Trump is dealing with today. MAGA Republicans are rebelling against him, and they're doing it publicly. The issue centers on Trump and MAGA Mike Johnson refusing to allow a vote on the Affordable Care Act subsidy extension before the holidays. Here's the situation. A discharge petition was signed by the requisite 218 members of Congress. 4 Republicans joined with Democrats to sign the petition to extend Affordable Care Act subsidies for a 3-year period. That means there are enough votes to bring this to the floor for a vote. That means there are likely enough votes to pass this extension. But instead of allowing the vote, MAGA Mike Johnson shut down the House. He sent everyone on vacation to prevent a vote from happening until Congress returns in mid-January. And MAGA Republicans like Mike Lawler are expressing serious frustration. They understand this decision could have significant political consequences, because 22 to 24 million Americans could lose their healthcare subsidies if these aren't extended. 22 to 24 million Americans who rely on subsidies to afford health insurance under the Affordable Care Act could be left without adequate coverage. And those people are going to remember which party refused to even allow a vote on extending their healthcare. Mike Lawler went on camera and said he's pissed for the American people. He called this a failure of leadership. He said it's absurd that Congress is refusing to vote on something this urgent. This represents a real healthcare crisis affecting millions of Americans. And the decision to shut down the House rather than hold a vote is creating divisions even within the Republican caucus. Meanwhile, Trump's new health department leadership is focusing on other priorities. Dr. Oz has been discussing various medical procedures and their costs, particularly around gender-affirming care. The administration's focus appears to be on culture war issues rather than the immediate healthcare crisis affecting tens of millions of Americans who could lose their subsidies. Now let's talk about the third major issue. Trump has been exposed manipulating inflation data, and the details are quite revealing.
Struck, we talked earlier in the show. Steve Ratner was here, helped us with a fact check. You know, the president does have some good news to talk about the economy, gas prices, for instance. But why the need to constantly sort of exaggerate? Gas prices are $3, they're not $2.50. You know, the idea of suggesting that I think a lot of the impact of inflation. Yes, some progress made, but not as much as he says. Why not just present American people and say, hey, look, these are the facts. I can understand how you feel. Why the need to exaggerate?
You know, I'd have to go back and look at the specific language, but I hate coming back with questions for you guys, but the president, in order to make sure that everybody understood the facts and the facts were documented, spent a lot of time with our team, preparing slides that showed the data for what he was talking about in the speech. And in some networks, while he was speaking, they showed the slides, and in some networks they didn't. And I just thought that was kind of unusual. I was expecting, when I was flipping around, to just see the slides everywhere. Gosh, we spent so much more time on them. But I think that the president had documentation for the facts that he was saying. They were in the slides. And so if there's a specific number you'd like to talk about, maybe he misspoke or something, I'm happy to talk about it. But I wonder.
Trump has been claiming that inflation has dropped dramatically, particularly when it comes to housing and rent. He's been suggesting inflation is essentially at zero for these categories. But here's what actually happened. The Bureau of Labor Statistics reported zero inflation for housing and rent in October and November. They essentially assumed rent and owner's equivalent rent was zero during that period. The reason given? The government was experiencing a shutdown during that time, so they simply reported zero rather than collecting actual data. That's a significant methodological problem. You can't measure inflation by just assuming it's zero because you didn't collect data. And that's not the only data manipulation issue. Trump's team also heavily weighted Black Friday sales data to show a massive drop in inflation for consumer goods and products. Instead of using regular pricing data collected throughout the month, they primarily emphasized the Black Friday sales period because, again, the government shut down limited normal data collection. So they use the one period of the year when everything is heavily discounted to calculate inflation numbers, and then Trump claimed that proves inflation has dropped dramatically. That's not how inflation measurement is supposed to work. You can't use sale prices from one specific promotional period and claim that represents the overall inflation picture. This raises serious questions about data integrity and whether economic reporting is being manipulated for political purposes. Now, here's the fourth major controversy, and this one involves our military personnel. Trump announced that he's giving $1,776 checks to 1.45 million troops as what he called a warrior dividend. He presented this as a generous bonus for military service members. But according to reporting by Defense One, that money is actually coming from congressionally allocated funds that were specifically intended to subsidize housing allowances for service members. In other words, Trump is taking money that Congress already appropriated for military housing subsidies and redistributing it as one-time checks so his administration can take credit for giving troops a bonus. This appears to be what's known as a shell game, moving money from one account to another to create the appearance of new benefits when it's actually just reallocating existing funds. The problem is that troops were counting on those housing allowance subsidies. Housing costs for military families are a significant issue, and Congress specifically allocated funds to help with those costs. By converting those subsidies into one-time bonus checks, the administration gets a PR win while potentially leaving troops with less support for ongoing housing expenses. This connects back to the broader housing crisis, doesn't it? The administration is reporting zero housing inflation by not collecting data, while simultaneously taking housing assistance away from military families by converting it to one-time bonuses. The optics are problematic, and the policy raises questions about whether this actually helps service members or just creates a favorable news cycle for the administration. And speaking of questionable financial dealings, let's talk about what happened with Trump Media today. Trump Media, which is the parent company of Truth Social, announced a $6 billion merger with a company called AE Technologies, described as a fusion power company. Now here's the context you need. There are currently no commercial plants producing electricity using fusion technology. Fusion is still largely experimental and futuristic. It doesn't exist as a commercial reality yet. So the question becomes, why would Trump's social media company merge with an experimental energy technology company? And why would a fusion energy company want to merge with a social media platform that, by most financial reports, has been losing tens of millions of dollars each quarter? One possible explanation is that fusion energy companies need approvals from the Department of Energy. They need grants from the federal government. They need regulatory support to move their technology forward. And by merging with a company owned by the President of the United States, they potentially gain more direct access to the agencies that control those approvals and grants. Whether that's the actual motivation or not, it certainly creates the appearance of a conflict of interest. And the market seemed to think this was good news for Trump media. The stock price jumped 33% on the merger announcement. So Trump personally benefits financially from a deal involving a company that needs federal government approvals and support. That raises obvious questions about whether business interests are being mixed with presidential authority. And finally, there was a revealing moment on MSNBC today. Trump's national economic advisor, Kevin Hassett, was asked a straightforward question. Why does Trump frequently exaggerate economic numbers? Why claim gas prices are $2.50 when they're actually $3? Why suggest inflation progress has been greater than the data actually shows? Hassett's response was telling. He said the administration prepared slides with economic data and complained that some networks showed the slides during Trump's speech while others didn't. That was essentially his entire answer. He didn't address the specific question about exaggerated numbers. He didn't explain the discrepancies between Trump's claims and the actual data. He just complained about media coverage of the administration's prepared materials. That non-answer is significant because it suggests even Trump's own advisors struggle to defend the accuracy of his economic claims. When your economic advisor can't or won't explain why the president's numbers don't match reality, that tells you something about the administration's relationship with factual accuracy. So let's recap Trump's catastrophic day. Trump's historical relationship with Jeffrey Epstein has been examined in significant detail by the New York Times, with the Epstein files set to release tomorrow. MAGA Republicans are publicly expressing frustration over the refusal to hold a healthcare vote that affects 22 to 24 million Americans. Trump has been caught using questionable methodology in inflation reporting, including reporting zero housing inflation by simply not collecting data. Trump has been exposed running what appears to be a shell game with military pay, converting housing subsidies into bonus checks for PR purposes. And Trump's business interests continue to intersect with presidential authority through deals like the Trump Media Fusion Company merger. These aren't isolated incidents. This represents a pattern of behavior and decision-making that raises serious questions. Questions about data integrity, questions about prioritizing PR over policy, questions about mixing business interests with government authority, questions about whether millions of Americans' healthcare needs are being addressed. Now, here's what's important to understand. Each of these stories individually would be significant, but all of them happening on the same day creates a broader picture. It suggests an administration where data can be manipulated for favorable headlines, where military benefits can be repackaged for political credit, where business deals involving presidential companies intersect with federal regulatory agencies, where healthcare for millions can be delayed for political reasons, where even members of the president's own party feel compelled to publicly express frustration. And when Trump's own economic advisor can't defend the accuracy of the president's numbers, that tells you something about the overall approach to truth and accountability. Make sure you're subscribed to National Brief Network because we're going to continue tracking all of these developing stories. We're going to keep asking questions about data accuracy, policy decisions, and conflicts of interest because these issues matter. They matter for government transparency. They matter for policy effectiveness. They matter for public trust in institutions. They matter for the millions of Americans whose lives are affected by these decisions, whether it's the 22 to 24 million people who could lose healthcare subsidies, or the 1.45 million military personnel whose housing assistance is being converted to one-time bonuses, or the American people who deserve accurate economic information. All of these issues have real consequences for real people. Today might represent a particularly difficult day for the Trump administration with multiple controversies emerging simultaneously. But the question is, what comes next? Will there be accountability? Will data reporting improve? Will the healthcare vote eventually happen? Will the Epstein files reveal important information? Will there be explanations for business deals that intersect with government authority? These are the questions we'll continue investigating. Share this video with others who want to stay informed about these developing stories, because informed citizens are essential for accountability. Understanding what's actually happening, beyond the spin, beyond the PR, beyond the prepared slides, that's what allows people to make informed judgments about leadership and policy, and that's what we're committed to providing. Clear information, documented facts, Important context. This story continues to develop. Stay tuned.